am a farmer, and so I do not look at manual labor at all and say, "Oh, I'm too good for that." No, no, that's what runs the world. The people who
Yeah.
are growing our food and raising our livestock, and even like I follow a lot of flower growers. They are feeding our souls with their beauty.
Yeah.
And so, like, that right there is the essence of life. We're talking about food and beauty. What else is there in life? Like, if you were to strip away all of this stuff, take away our phones, take away our electricity, take away all that stuff, you have food, water, shelter, beauty. That's it.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
should we not be that? And this is what I look at the farmers and I say, I do not believe that the people who are feeding our bodies and souls should be starving themselves.
What's up, you beautiful beasts? I'm Katie. I'm on a mission to help humans become their favorite versions of themselves and to strive for overall health by healing their relationship to food and exercise, healing their relationship to their body, and most importantly, healing their relationship to themselves, all without ever having to step on a scale. I have had the privilege to talk to all kinds of different humans who have been through a plethora of experiences just being a human and existing. I believe that every single time someone shares their story, at least one person listening will learn from it, be inspired by it, and maybe, just maybe, even change the entire direction of their life. These are the stories of humans unveiling their beautiful beast. Keep listening. This is the Unveiling the Beast podcast.
So can you tell me and the listeners a little bit about who you are and why you think you are who you are?
How
Take your
many
time.
hours do you have?
All the time.
So, who am I? So, I guess at heart, I'm just a person who really wants to see the world be a better place, which I know just sounds so corny, but I grew up on a farm. And so I grew up with four generations all in the same area. So it was my brother, my sister, and I, and then my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents. So farming is kind of a very integral part of who I am. Um, Writing is another really integral part of who I am. So I started running our farm stand at 6, which sounds like super, super impressive, except that our farm stand consisted of like one wheelbarrow full of sweet corn that I would sell
Mm.
to like whoever drove in the driveway. But I spent a lot of time by myself reading. And then when I got a little bit older, I started taking the brown paper bags and cutting them open, and I would write stories on the insides of them to keep myself entertained. And then when I went home at night, I would type them up on my typewriter. So I should have known about then, at the age of 8, that my life would somehow connect writing and agriculture. But it took me, another 39 years to figure so, so here I am at 47, and I am now working with farmers and other people, but my real focus is to help farmers to reorganize their lives so that they are at the center of their farm business and the farm supports them instead of them focusing on their farm and then getting burnt out and selling out and having a terrible quality of life. And so along with that, I do journal workshops for people as well. So it's not just farmers, but they're the group that I'm really trying to trying to support the most because they don't have that kind of support.
Yeah. I love that. I love when two things that seemingly don't go together can go together.
Right. Well, and then you
Yeah.
add the mental health component into it, which I kind of fell into backwards because my children, it's horrible, but my children were physically abused by their dad just
Mm.
after we had gotten divorced. And so, you know, I spent all of that time trying to figure out how do you support your kids when they've gone
Yeah.
through this experience and, you're going through DCYF and you're doing all that stuff that is just not at all easy. And then I had a college roommate who works in child protection, working with, she works with like UNICEF and Plan International and all that those kinds of organizations. And we teach people how to support the mental health of children and women who are in adversity. And so I ended up coming on as an editor. And then because I also have an education background, I became one of their lead instructional designers. And so I've spent the last 8 years in this mental health arena that I wasn't actually trained in, but now I basically have been trained in because I've been learning enough to train other people.
Yeah.
So when you add that in together with the agriculture and the journaling, it's really an amazing, culmination of a lifetime of very strange experiences.
Yeah. And it's a nice, like the word that came to my head was it's a nice soup of
Yes.
like it makes a nice broth and
Yeah. Yeah, well,
yeah,
the
that's
business
really cool.
consultants tell you to niche down. They're like, focus on one thing. And I'm sitting there going, but I don't really focus on one thing. I do journaling. I just published a poetry book about grief and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I'm too eclectic to really, niche down too much. But yeah, it is a soup. And I think like who wants to separate out all the parts of a soup? You
Exactly.
don't want to do that.
Right?
Then you have boiled dinner. Like,
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Um, so what actually got you to want to help the farmers in the way that you do? Like, is there a story behind that, like personal
of
experience?
of course there's a
Oh,
story
let
with
me hear it,
me.
please.
With me, there's always a story. So before I got married, I actually started doing agricultural extension work. So which I was totally not trained for, but I had an education background and a farming background. So I went and worked with farmers on all kinds of stuff, helping them with their farm plans. Then I had babies. Then I got divorced. And a few years ago, I went through burnout. I
Mm,
had been working on a project that was training facilitators on parenting and adolescent life skills. And my son has had he's neurodivergent. He's had obviously the trauma background. So he's
hmm.
definitely been a challenge to to parent in some ways. And he had just turned 10 at that time, which according to the structure that we were using, adolescence falls between 10 and 24. And while I was just dealing with the adolescent life skills, I was totally fine. I was going gangbusters. And then we started hitting the parenting side of it. And I had a moment where I realized, oh my gosh, I'm writing about me. Like this is me. I'm parenting these children in adversity and I'm trying to tell other people how to get through this and I am struggling and it's so hard.
Mm,
And I like plummeted into burnout immediately. Like I'd gone through 6 or 8 years of being resilient, bounce back, bounce back, bounce back. And then I
yeah.
crashed. And over the course of that, I ran into this journaling thing. And at the same time, my steady work stream that for 8 years, I had no problem finding work. I had more work than I knew what to do with, all of a sudden dried up. So I finally got
Mm,
to the point where I was healthy enough to work again. And then I had no work. And I was like, well, this is no good. I'm a single mother. Like I
yeah.
gotta have a job. So I ran into the Therapeutic Writing Institute and found this journaling for mental health. And it was this aha moment. I was like, this is what I was meant to do. And I immediately thought of all the farmers I know who are having relational conflicts, who are burning out, who are putting all of their effort into really hard careers and wanting to do it well and living really difficult lives in the midst of it. And I was like,
Mm,
I've got what it takes to help them. Like with this journaling piece, I have stuff that nobody else has. I've worked agriculture from the inside as a farmer. I grew up in it. I made my living at it for 4 years. I've been an ag service provider, so I understand what it takes to support farmers from the outside. And now I have all of this experience and training in these proven techniques that can help to manage our lives better, that can support our mental health, and that can help us really reorganize our lives in a way that's going to be better. And I was like, this is it. I have to do this. So Penlight was born.
I love that so much. And it's one of the cool things. Would you consider yourself a coach?
I do, because I don't know what else to call myself. Like,
Right.
I also call myself a process facilitator, which makes no sense to anybody except those of us who are literary people and like to play with words.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I ask because in my coaching community, like everybody has their own thing, and there's a lot of people doing things that where it's like, oh, you put those two things together.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is when we're coaching people, at least the people that I coach, we're never like, hey, want to come hang out with me and go back to your childhood so you can figure out where your limiting beliefs came from? No. We're like, hey, let's for me, I help people heal their relationship to food and exercise. And so I'm like, hey, let's hang out, let's talk, what's going on, you know? So we never actually start with what we're going to do, but we kind of present the, I guess, outcome that they're looking for, you
Yeah,
know?
you got to start with the pain point. Like, what is
Yeah.
it, so, and that's one of those things with the farmers that I'll go to them. I'll be like, so how much conflict do you have in your farm partnership? Really?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I grew up on a multi-generational farm, and I can bet you've got relational conflict. Unless you're the only farmer there. And even then, I've done enough internal family systems work on myself to realize that we've got all these parts. You get conflict just within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Oh
start
yeah.
adding other people and all their internal conflicts, and you put them all together. Oh, you got a juicy mess. And then when they're related and they're working together and they're living together, I mean, we had 4 generations living in 2 houses.
Wow.
Think about
That's
that
really
for a
cool.
minute. Like, but totally like the Waltons in some ways, but then it's like, wow, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with the fact where you really can never get away from your family or your business partner? Like, think of how many people you work with that you're
Yeah.
really glad to go home at the end of the day and say, well, that's done for today. And you don't get to do that as farmers, and it's beautiful. And it adds a whole nother layer of complexity that unless you've lived it, it's really hard to relate to that because it just
Yeah.
feels different when you're there.
Yeah. I feel that in my soul because I've been taking care of my dad for 10 years
Yeah.
and I'm one of 4 siblings. So we have 3 generations in the house. My
Yep.
dad, who's 86, and then me and my husband, and then our son. So I kind of relate to that. Like,
Yeah.
and I work from home, so I can't just clock out and then go home and get away from it. It's always there.
Yeah.
Not to complain, I'm very blessed that we've been able to take care of him, and he doesn't think we're taking care of him, so shh. Um,
No, he's taking care of you. Are you kidding?
exactly.
He's
Yes.
there making sure that you've got everything where it's supposed to be and you're
Mhm.
not messing up your lives.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
good. I'm glad you've got him to do
Yeah.
that for you.
But yeah, that I totally relate to that. And it's this whole other dynamic that people who don't live it don't understand, like you were saying.
Yeah, and it's the best of times, worst of times. Like that's what I tell everybody all the time. I'm like, these are the things that are a tale of two cities. They really are the things that you most want because you really want that
Hmm.
connectedness with your family. And to have all of that is such a beautiful thing. And I know, like, I took care of my great grandfather the summer before he passed away. And so I stayed there. I spent the night there. He had a colostomy. He had, all kinds of a catheter. I mean, short-term memory was shot. Like it was really challenging, and yet it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. And so,
Mm.
like, I would not trade what I had in those moments for anything. And living it is really challenging. Like when you're answering the same question for the 16th time in
Hmm.
as many minutes, you're like, oh, my land. Like, Are you ever
Yeah.
going to realize, yes, grandpa just left, like your son just left? He'll be
Yeah.
back. He'll be back. He took care of your eye. He loves you. But they don't, like, you have to just get out of yourself a little bit and look to what they need. And doing that all the time is really exhausting. So it's hard
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. My dad's thing isn't he's all there mentally, but he's very deaf and he doesn't want to admit it. And he says, I'm not deaf, everybody else talks muffled.
Right.
And so I think that's probably our biggest frustration is that he can't hear us. And it's not that he can't hear us, it's that he won't admit that he can't hear us. And because he's covered for like hearing aids and stuff, but he won't. He's so stubborn. Anyway, we don't have to talk about my dad, but I feel that. Yeah.
It's totally okay.
Yeah.
But see, this is what I do. This exactly is what I do, where we
Mhm.
sit down and we say, hey, what's going on? And what is it that we can do to support you in that? Sometimes you just need a listening ear. Sometimes you need
Mhm.
to find a break. Like sometimes you need to restructure the house. Sometimes you need to, I don't know, set up childcare, not childcare
Yeah.
in your case, but
Right.
expanding out past your
Yeah.
personal experience. But
Yeah.
that's a lot of what it is just trying to help people see the solutions that they don't necessarily see on their own. And it's not even like what I love about the work that I do and the processes that I use is that I never, ever, ever feel like, oh, wow, look what a change I've made in your life. I look at
Yeah.
it and say, wow, look what you already knew that was there. And you just needed the right tools to find it. Because
Mhm.
I mean, when I was an ag extension agent, I'd go on to farms, especially new farmers, because they always want to know, like, well, how do I make this farm work? What should I do? And I always hated that first question, what should I do on my farm? And I always gave them the same answer. I would look at them and say, well, I'm standing here on your farm and I easily have a dozen ideas of what you can do on your farm. But that is really not the question. Like what I would do doesn't matter at all. What's going to work for you? Because
Yes.
I might want to put the thing, I might want to put up fences and put horses and cattle and all that stuff. And you don't like animals. So why bother even asking me what I would do?
Right.
Let's figure out. And this is where I start. And this is where farmers also have a struggle because farmers are so conditioned to live in the I have to do, and this is what we do now, because
Mm.
there's such a seasonality to their lives. And so much of our routine is driven by things completely out of our control. You're totally at the mercy of the weather when you're in
Right.
farming, and you spend your whole life trying to control the weather, which is kind of funny because we have absolutely no control over it. So think about what that would be like for a few minutes.
Mm.
It's too dry, so you're trying to irrigate. It's too wet, so you're trying to put in tile and drain the swamp. But I want to go in there and say, who are you? And if you ask them, who are you? They say, I'm a farmer. And so you can't ask that question. You have to do other things. Like I do a lot of lists. I'll do like, give me your top 5 people you want to spend more time with. What are the top 5 places you would go to if like, money
Mhm.
was not an option? Just 5 places you would like to see. What are your top 5 things to do when you're by yourself? And we use that. And then I say, these are your priorities. These are the things that you really care about. If I had asked them, what are your priorities? They wouldn't be able to answer that question. But when you have those lists now, they can take those and say, oh, yeah, that's funny. And it's funny how often, like the farm itself doesn't necessarily make that list. And that's where I say, okay, so you love farming, but your farm itself is not necessarily one of the top 5 things you like to do when you're by
Mm.
yourself or when you're with other people. So maybe that's a sign that we need to either reorganize the business, or maybe it doesn't need to be a full-time business. Maybe it needs to be a hobby, or maybe like again,
Yeah.
I could come up with a million options for people because I just tend to see that way. So what happens though is that then you free them to come up with the solutions that really resonate for them, as opposed to the solutions that they've been handed down for 4 generations, 5 generations of we grow sweet corn. That's what we do. We've got an
Mm.
apple orchard. You're not going to cut down the apple orchard. Why are you going to cut down the apple orchard? Well, maybe you need to cut down the apple orchard. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherently sacred about that. And yet for a farmer, it becomes sacred and it becomes a part of themselves where cutting down that orchard feels like cutting off their right arm, even though that right arm is diseased and it's not doing them any good. So it's kind of an interesting process and exciting when you see, good changes being made, like people starting to think in a new way. That
Yeah.
for me is really exciting.
Yeah. I'm loving the I want to say parallels, I guess, because it's like we work with the same concepts but in different contexts, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. So
of
like
course.
I like my clients they're like I said, I'm helping them heal their relationship to food. And because everybody's different, everybody's diet is going to be different. And these people that I work with, I don't know why I said it like that. Um,
I get
they
it.
have a lifetime of diet culture in both ears, telling them what they're supposed to eat and how much they're supposed to move, and completely disconnecting their mind and their body. And
Yes.
so like I hear what you're doing, like it's the same thing, but in a different context. And so
Right.
I got goosebumps. I'm loving
Well, and this is the thing is that, we all have a certain group of people. I firmly believe that we all have a certain group of people that we were meant to touch in our lives. Like
it.
I'm 100% convinced that we all have our own unique purpose for being on this earth at this point in time. And when we embrace that about ourselves and stop trying to fix our, like, not fix, that's not the right word, but trying to fit ourselves into, as you were saying, all the voices
Mhm.
that come
Yeah.
here, and we're trying to adapt to what the voices, like the niche down, all the voices
Yeah.
are saying you have to do this. No, you don't always have to do that. And sometimes doing that is going to be the worst possible thing for you and the people that you can be ministering to in a really
Yeah.
profound way. Like, food issues are huge. My family has a lifetime of food issues, and I have food issues. And so working through that and having a healthier relationship with food and freeing yourself up that there doesn't have to be one right way to do any of this is amazing because we're all so different. Like
Yeah.
no one, as you said, no one diet is going to look the same for anybody. And I mean that as in global diet, not like the
Right.
crash, nutritional plan,
Right.
or however you want to phrase that. But
Yeah.
and no farm is going to be the same. No farm family has the same backgrounds, but when you have those skills to come in and help them to start to resolve some of those really core issues, it's amazing. So I'm really, I don't know, I just feel excited to do it. And
Yeah.
it is a little bit of a struggle because farmers are a little resistant to this whole like you almost have to sell it as a business plan as opposed to like a mental health kind of thing. It's like,
Yeah.
which is why I focus on I tell them, are you ready to start making your farm work for you instead of you working for your farm? Like get your farm out of the center, put you back in the center, and then build your
Yeah.
farm around that. And that seems to resonate a little bit more than let's make you feel good about life. Because farmers are like,
Right.
yeah, right. Have you farmed lately?
Yeah. And it's like
Excuse me.
it's how do I put it into words? So I have an example. Um, my coach used to work strictly with Mary Kay consultants, and the messaging he would put out was, let me help you with your sales. But underneath it, because he has the training, well, now I'm trained the way he was trained. He would help people with perfectionism or limiting beliefs that I'm not good enough and I can't make any money, that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
he's not going to go out there and be like, you want to fix your perfectionism? Because as a Mary Kay salesperson, I don't
You're
even know
supposed to
that's a
look,
problem.
well, you're supposed to look perfect. You're
Exactly.
you're you're supposed to have the makeup and notice, like no makeup, no because I had a person try to sell me on being a Mary Kay consultant one time, and I looked at her and I said, "Are you serious? Like, do you see? Like, I have a skin routine. Like, what are you talking about, Mary Kay?" And you got to know where your strengths are and
Yeah.
getting dolled up and looking pretty every day, that is not going to be me. But for working with farmers, that's actually perfect, because if you show up on their farm looking like a Mary Kay consultant, you've already lost the battle, because they're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, sweetheart,
exactly.
you're showing up to my farm in your high heels. Are you kidding me?" And you might
Yeah.
know exactly what you're doing, but that image has already told them, "Nope, nope, I don't know. I can't relate to this." Whereas, I show up with my gray hair showing and my hair in a braid,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Yeah, I get it. This is who we are. We're just
Yeah.
we're gonna be who we are." So,
Yeah.
but
I've
yeah,
had to
that
learn.
selling it in the way that they are ready to hear is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, technically I'm a Mary Kay lady, but I haven't like I've just been using the products for years and years
Yeah,
because I can't find anything else that I like.
yeah,
In that, I met my coach. That's how I found him.
that's
Um,
awesome.
but like, you're talking about the makeup. I learned, so like rewind, this probably isn't important, but in high school I was like full on gothic, right?
Yeah,
And I learned that I can put my makeup on because I like the way it looks, not because I need to fix my face, right?
yes.
So I usually have makeup on when I do my podcast, but I'll post videos
Mhm.
on social media of me working out in my gym with no eyebrows. Like I don't care. I I've had to do like this tweak in my head of like, so why do you actually put makeup on? Oh, because I
Right.
like the rock star look. That's why I wear dark makeup. And so
Yep.
when you have that shift and you figure out whether it's makeup or anything else,
Yeah.
when you're doing it for you and not other people, everything changes.
Absolutely. Well, I have a daughter
Everything.
who is like, she just loves makeup, and she comes
Hmm.
out, oh, she's 11 in like what, 5 days?
Going on 30.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I have the equivalent of two firstborns, because I've got a 12-year-old son and a daughter who's just about to turn 11. And let me tell you, oh my gosh, and they're precocious. But
Mm,
anyway, she'll come out for church and she'll have like, I don't even know how she gets these colors, because I don't obviously don't do makeup. And she's got like the lips that are like blackish, purpley blue. And I swear she's taken like six different colors and mushed them all together. And she pulls it off. I'm like, I don't know how you're pulling this off. And then she's got the eyeshadow everywhere. And she just loves it. And so I'm like, you know what? Go for it, kid. Like, I'm not going to sit
yeah.
here and tell you not to wear your eye stuff, because it's not hurting anybody. Go
Yeah.
go do what you want. And when we walk into church and she looks a little unique, I'm just like, hey, yeah, I'm not going to fight with her about what she wears and how she does her face up. Like, that is so not the issue that I want her to have. I want
Yeah.
her to know that she can make choices on this, and not,
Hmm.
it's not that big a deal. Just do what you want to do.
Yeah. And should she decide not to wear it anymore, it's her decision and not because somebody on the outside said you shouldn't
Right.
should it all over her.
Yeah, well, exactly. And
Yeah.
shame her into it, because that's the other thing.
Mhm.
I'm like, I grew up in a culture that doesn't handle variety very well. Like, if you're
Mm.
not like us, there's obviously something wrong with you. And so there was like this very intense need to conform. And I'm a firstborn people pleaser. So,
Yeah.
conforming came pretty easily for me, I thought, until I got older and realized how much of my soul had been lost in the conforming process, and I didn't even know it. And so when I became a parent, as much as I appreciated so much of my upbringing, because a lot of it was amazing and I wouldn't
Hmm.
change it. But I also looked at some of those things and said, I never want my kids to feel like there was a part of themselves that wasn't valued by their mom, because that's my job. My job is to value them and to help them to be the best that they're going to be at whatever they're going to be. Like, I
Yeah.
remember telling my son, listen, I don't care if you're a garbage man. We need good garbage men out there. Like, what would the streets look like? There's a Monk episode. You want to go see the Monk episode where the garbage guys go on strike? Like, we need the people who are doing that kind of work. And if
Hmm.
you're doing that and that is where you're called to be, I support that 125%, because that is a noble thing that you're doing for the world.
Yeah.
And I remember some relatives, who shall remain nameless, were irate that I would ever tell my son that. And I was like, listen, we've got different values here. Like, my
Yeah.
values are not around money. My values are not around status. My values are around the character of the people that I'm raising, and the people that I work with. Like, I want their character to be what it was meant to be, because I do believe that we've all got that imprint of God in us, and that we're supposed to shine and we're supposed to bring light to the world. And so I want to help them do that. I don't want to
Yeah.
stick them in a basket and be like, "Oh, sorry, your light's too bright, or your light's purple and I only like white light." Like, really?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And what you said to your child versus what they might have heard. So they probably heard, you should go be a trash man. And that's probably, I don't know for sure, but that could be why they were so irate. That's probably what they heard. And
yeah.
then you can
Well,
say, you're attacking something I didn't say.
you know what it is? They are from another blue collar family,
Hmm.
and they their goal has always been to get their children a step ahead of where they are, a step ahead. So
Hmm.
that what does it mean to be a step ahead? Well, for them, it's to be not breaking your back doing manual labor, and it's to be making more money. And, those kinds of things signify a sense of success. And
Hmm.
I am a farmer, and so I do not look at manual labor at all and say, "Oh, I'm too good for that." No, no, that's what runs the world. The people who
Yeah.
are growing our food and raising our livestock, and even like I follow a lot of flower growers. They are feeding our souls with their beauty.
Yeah.
And so, like, that right there is the essence of life. We're talking about food and beauty. What else is there in life? Like, if you were to strip away all of this stuff, take away our phones, take away our electricity, take away all that stuff, you have food, water, shelter, beauty. That's it.
Yeah. And
So,
so then what can possibly be one step ahead of that? Right?
right? And so,
Yeah.
should we not be that? And this is what I look at the farmers and I say, I do not believe that the people who are feeding our bodies and souls should be starving themselves. Like, that's not right to me. It is
Yeah.
so heartbreaking to me when I look at farm families that are falling apart because of the stressors in their lives. And I say, no, this should not be, and it does not have to be. So let's do something different. Let's learn some new ways of communicating with each other. I was trained in mediation. So, bring some of that mediation skill in, the nonviolent communication where we're like, what are your needs? What is this feeling and this, anger that you're saying? What is really underneath that? And if we can look at that with each other, oh my gosh, it changes everything. It really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. And the effect it has on our physical health People can argue with me all they want. The mental health and the physical health is one health.
Yes.
So, and when you're physically, and I don't mean like ripped or in shape or like
Mm-mm.
fit, whatever your definition of that is, when you're physically healthy, you tend to be more mentally healthy. And when you're mentally healthy, you tend to be more physically healthy. And it rubs off in everything that you do, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was just reading for a class I'm taking on post-traumatic growth, and which sounds like a terrible title, but it's fascinating. I find this stuff fascinating. You would find this stuff fascinating. My farmers would be like, yeah, I don't need that psychology baloney. But I love it. And what one of the studies that they were talking about was actually with HIV positive men who had experienced like a sense of meaning in what had happened to them and
Mm,
how they were approaching this. And so they actually were experiencing post-traumatic growth. And across the board, even if they didn't necessarily say that they were, didn't struggle anymore, because, how many of us can say, oh, yeah, I don't struggle anymore after having a life-changing health diagnosis.
right.
But they lived longer across the board. The people who are able to find meaning in that process and through that, and then say, no, actually, I've been able to have good come out of this, even though it might have been something I didn't want to have happen to me. I am a better person today than I was before that happened. They actually lived longer. Their bodies responded, and it had nothing to do with their physical health. It had nothing to do with how healthy, like, their lifestyle was, because those things were all different, but they
Yeah.
still had longer lifespans than the people who got stuck in the pain and were never able to find meaning in that. And yeah, my brain tingles when I have these moments. Like you were saying, getting the shivers, my brain is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And that just amazes me. And so when we can support people to grow through these trials and to have the skills that they need, not just to bounce back to, the starting point, but then to rethink where they are in the world, rethink their relationships, rethink their possibilities. It's amazing what we're doing for them, and what they're
Yeah.
able to do, because you can't make somebody grow. I mean, it's like
Right.
I have a plant everywhere. I've got plants everywhere. You don't make the plant grow. You give it what it needs, and then it either grows or it dies. Like, you don't always have control over that. So, I don't know. I love facilitating that process.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things too is people need the permission to look at other options in their life. Some people are so in their routines and their structure, they forget that there's more to choose from.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I say this in almost every episode, but one of the biggest things that has changed me in these last couple of years of working on myself is noticing without judging, which means just notice things that you do, notice things that you say, notice reactions that you have to other people saying things to you, and don't judge it. And if you judge it, notice that too. And that way you start to become aware of things that you didn't even know were there, or you were just like so in this routine that you didn't realize you were doing something or saying something or feeling a certain way. And once you're aware that it's there, then you're at choice and you have a choice to fix it or not fix it. And so that has just blown my mind these last few years, and it's helped me
Yeah.
change everything. And so back to the point of like so many people just don't even know they're at choice. And so sometimes that's what I start with. Just start noticing without judging, write it down. And
Yeah.
if you judge, notice that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I second that 100%, because
Mhm.
my therapist definitely, that was one of the things that we definitely started. I've been in
Yeah.
therapy for like 10 years. You go through divorce and abuse.
Love therapy.
You hang out. I know, right? But then I combined the journaling with it, and it was like the growth I had been making progress over the 10 years. But like the growth went super fast, and not because I hadn't ever journaled before, because I mean, I've journaled my entire life, but
Mm-hmm.
now I have like specific techniques and I know how to use them in certain situations to accomplish certain goals. And it's like that, it takes that awareness that you were talking about and it goes one layer deeper because you recognize it and then you can be curious about it and say, okay, what does this mean for me? Like, why am I okay? So I do the parts. So I have different parts that have names. And so one of my parts is Rage Lady. And she's actually, I watch a lot of Chinese, like those costume dramas that are like all fantasy stuff.
Okay.
I don't speak Chinese. I just watch them with subtitles. It's a guilty pleasure. Can't even explain it. My friend who's Korean's like, you've got to watch the K dramas. And I'm like, nah, I'm just starting to learn a little bit of Chinese. I kind of like this. But anyway, so she's this Chinese like warrior princess all dressed in red. Like that's how I envision my Rage Lady. And there was a day where my son did something and I flipped out. Like I hadn't flipped out like that in years. And I was like, what in the world is going on? And then I did it the next morning too. And I was like, okay, something's definitely happening here. So I sat down and I wrote out a dialogue. So I sat down with Rage Lady and I was like, all right, Rage Lady, what's going on? And she was able to sit there and talk back and be like, hey, you know what? You don't have any space in your house. You don't have a single time to yourself. You've got a tiny house, you've got three people and a cat, and everybody's always wanting stuff from you. And then you put the kids to bed and you want time to yourself, and you don't get time to yourself because you have a son who's a mendacious kleptomaniac. So he likes to sneak out in the dark and see what he can take and eat in his room. And you want to talk eating habits. Oh, we should talk after this about that. But
Okay.
hoarding food in his
Yeah.
room and like all this stuff that I'm like, none of this is healthy behavior. And so even when you are supposed to have downtime, you're not getting the downtime. And that's a need. Like that we're kind of conditioned as women to think that alone time and me time is selfish, but that's actually a human need. Like we need
Right.
times when we're not constantly caring for others. You know this. You're a two-time caretaker,
Mm-hmm.
caretaking for the generation above and the generation below. That's it. That doesn't stop. Like
Right.
24/7, even when you're asleep, there's a part of your brain that's listening for the kid or the dad who's calling for
Yeah.
something in the middle of the night. And that's just the fact of being a caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really had to process through that. And once I realized what it was, I was like, okay, that is a felt need. So what am I going to do to meet that need? And that's it. Then you say, all right, so maybe I need more time alone. Maybe I need to send the kids to my sister's once a week, or you come up with a
Yeah.
plan that works for you that helps you to meet that need. But sometimes, as you were talking about the awareness, just knowing what that need is and honoring the fact that that's a legitimate need, sometimes that's all the your self wants, is to say, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's valid. It's valid that I'm upset about the fact that I don't have time alone. And then somehow, and I wish I understood how it works, but somehow just validating that for yourself takes a lot of the angst away. And then you're like, okay, well, I still don't have any more time for myself. But
Yeah.
now it's not turning me into a raving lunatic. So,
Right.
I'm not screaming at my kids. That's a win.
I was gonna ask too,
Excuse
well,
me.
that's like the coach in me wants to ask you, when you do give yourself downtime, does that include the mental talk too? I mean, like, are you letting your thoughts and what's it called? There's a name for it. Not There's a name for like when we're taking a break, but we're still thinking about all the things we need to do. I'm totally
Yeah, like
blanking
that
on it.
ruminating on it, I think, or
Yeah.
I'm also in a creative expression course right now because I love learning. So anyway, but I'm in that, and they talk about your shooby-doo. It's like the
Ooh, I like
voice
that.
that doesn't stop. It's like that running beat underneath everything else.
Yeah.
And yeah, I find that this is where that journaling comes in. I find that when I have something that I start to fixate on, now I am able to recognize when it's just, oh, I'm just thinking about like mulling and I'm just processing and it's fine. It can, that beat can stay in my head. It's not going to hurt anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I can distinguish the difference between that and something that I need to actually work with. And so when I do have to work with it, then I have a few of my go-to that dialoguing, like even dialoguing with fear, dialoguing for me because I'm a creative writer, that
Mm-hmm.
is hugely important. And I mean poetry. This poetry book came out of like a lifetime of going through grief and death and, my sister and sister-in-law's miscarriages, like all the pain that you experience in life ended up finding its way into poetry. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I have something that is like that, of course, I also, write about happy things and,
Yeah.
love and joy and peace and,
Yeah.
because you want balance in your life. You don't want to always
Yeah.
focus on, but yeah, so that's where I find the Chinese dramas to be really helpful for me. And I got hooked on them quite a while ago, and it was because the rest of my brain did shut off. It was the
Mm,
only way where that Shooby-Doo thing wasn't happening
yeah.
because I could, well, first of all, I had to actually be reading the subtitles because I don't speak Chinese. And it's fantasy, so it's so completely not my life that I can
Mm,
just take my life and say, I don't want to be Kay today. I'm going to be this lovely Chinese girl who is adorable and, and the elegant Chinese guy who's going to treat her like gold, which don't even get me on that. But I'm like, oh, that's lovely. It's so lovely to be in this fantasy world
yeah.
for a little while.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
cool. I
don't know
like
if
that.
that's exactly what you were getting at, but at the
Yeah,
time,
no, no,
like
that's
that
good.
downtime,
Hmm.
I
And I
used to
remembered,
read, but now I'm too tired to read. So,
oh yeah, I feel that. I don't have time to like sit and read a book anymore, but I do listen to audiobooks because I drive a
yes.
lot.
Oh, yes.
But I remembered the term. It's called mental load. It's
Ah,
yeah,
yes.
the mental load of like even when you're sitting and it's quiet and you're not doing anything, at least for me, it's still do 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 do. And I
Yeah.
sometimes I have to just like shut up, Katie.
Well, I
Shut
kind of
up.
got so so it's funny that you mentioned this because I did also learn about like mantras, which I'm
Hmm.
not I'm so I have a very close relationship with God, but I am not like into a lot of I don't know. Anyway,
Religion.
no, I am. It's hard to explain, but anyway,
Okay, you don't
things
have
like
to.
well, I don't know how to, so it's okay. But anyway, things like mantras are usually things that I'm like, that's not really my thing. But the more I was studying about them, again, as part of another one of these therapeutic writing classes, they were talking about how there's actually a perfect number of syllables for a mantra, and it's seven, which I found kind of interesting because seven,
Hmm.
like in biblical terminology, is like the number of perfection. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And so I have started to like if I'm really anxious or if I'm in a setting where my brain is constantly going, but I can't escape from it, like I'm in a place where I have to stay there. I will choose like a mantra and I will sit there and just kind of meditate on that. And I have found that to be like amazing. So like
Hmm.
I was in a session with a family and they were doing some work. And I just sat there and started saying, Lord, let me love this family. And like I could just feel, like as I kept saying that, I could just feel love filling the room. And I was like, this is amazing. Like this is not, and that's the sort of thing that I would normally be like, not sure about that, but I've experienced it. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to question. I'm not going to question what I'm experiencing. People may not
Right.
agree with me. They might not believe me, but I mean, I know what I'm experiencing. So like,
Yeah. And that goes back to
and
the individual. Like you're different than everyone else, so they don't have to understand it. It's
right.
for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and the family didn't have to know, like the family had no idea that any of that was going on because they were doing a self-assessment on something. So I just had time to sit there and be with them and wanted to just focus on where we were at. And so that was my way of both quieting my mind, but also serving them when I wasn't saying anything, I wasn't doing anything. I just wanted to be a conduit of love to them. And so, yeah, so those 7 syllables, I try to find the ones that are 7 syllables and it's interesting. Try it out.
I will.
I know it sounds crazy. A year
I
ago,
like crazy though.
I'd been like, what are you doing? My parents are a little worried about me sometimes. I think they think I've gone off the deep end. They're
Let 'em
very
know.
strong Christians, but they're very traditional Christians. And so I think sometimes they look at me and they're like, are you sure what you're doing is godly? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
like, God tells me to love people. I don't see anything wrong with this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
And I ask everyone at the end of every episode, and that is, if you had one piece of advice that you could give to the world, what would it be?
So again, this is going to sound corny, but I mean it with all my heart. And it is to get to know Jesus because I could not have gone through my life without a really intensely personal walk with him to the extent that like I have been in the woods walking and have literally felt him holding my hand before. So like that kind of intensity of relationship. And when I say that, I also am very careful to say like sometimes those of us who say we love Jesus are not the people, like you don't want to get to know Jesus through us because we're going to screw up and we're going to show you parts of Jesus that are not Jesus. So spending time actually knowing him as he showed himself to be in the Bible and through like the meditation and through getting connected with him, I feel is literally the most life-giving thing that you can do for yourself and anybody else. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful beasts, Castrataro signing off. Until next time.